I wasn't supposed to be home today. Actually, I wasn't supposed to be back for another week. That's why I hadn't told Harper I was coming early. I wanted it to be a surprise. Something different from our usual routine of phone calls and video chats while I was away. I could already picture the way she'd react, her eyes lighting up, the way she'd gasp when she saw me standing at the door. She'd rush into my arms, maybe even tear up a little, telling me how much she missed me. That was the plan. But reality? Reality has a way of blindsiding you when you least expect it. The trip home was uneventful. For once, the airport had been a breeze, no long lines, no delays, no missing luggage. Even the drive back was smooth, no frustrating traffic jams or detours. It felt like everything was lining up perfectly for my surprise. My suitcase sat in the passenger seat, my phone buzzing every so often with unread messages. I ignored them. Right now, I just wanted to focus on the moment, on walking through that door and being home again. I imagined what it'd be like to sleep in my own bed, to finally kiss my wife after weeks of being apart. But the moment I turned onto our street, something felt off. There were cars parked up and down the curb in front of my house, more than usual. At first, I thought maybe Harper had invited some friends over. Wouldn't have been anything out of the ordinary. But then I noticed something else. These weren't cars I recognized. Some of them were sleek and expensive, the kind that stood out in our modest neighborhood. Others had baby decorations tied to their side mirrors, tiny pink and blue ribbons fluttering in the breeze. And then I saw it. Balloons, pink and blue, were tied along the porch railing, bobbing in the wind. A massive banner stretched across the front of the house, and the words on it hit me like a punch to the gut: "Welcome our little miracle." My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Strangely, suspicion wasn't even my first reaction. My brain was still trying to process what I was seeing. Our little miracle? Whose little miracle? The house looked exactly the same, the walls, the neatly trimmed garden, even the familiar porch steps. But everything about it felt different. Like I was standing outside someone else's life. Laughter spilled from inside. Music, the clinking of glasses. A party. For a baby. I pulled over a few houses down, just far enough that no one would notice me. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel, my pulse picking up speed, though I couldn't quite explain why. There was no real reason for this to unsettle me. Maybe it was a neighborhood gathering. Maybe the banner was for someone else, just hung where it was most visible. Maybe Harper had planned a surprise for someone I didn't know about. Maybe. I killed the engine and stepped out. The air smelled like freshly cut grass and something sweet, probably cake. A celebration. For a second, I considered calling Harper. But then I decided against it. I needed to see this for myself. I needed to understand before letting my mind go places it didn't need to. I walked toward the house slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. Like an outsider looking in. The closer I got, the more details stood out. Through the big front window, I could see people, some familiar, others complete strangers. They were drinking, laughing, celebrating. But the thing that struck me the most was how put together it all looked. The decorations weren't a last-minute thing. The gifts stacked near the fireplace weren't some casual, spur-of-the-moment gesture. This had been planned. Carefully. A knot twisted in my stomach. Still, I hesitated. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe. And then I noticed something else. The front door. It wasn't fully shut. It hung slightly open, just enough to seem like an invitation, or a challenge. I took a deep breath. Then, I stepped inside. The second I stepped inside, the noise slammed into me, laughter, overlapping conversations, the soft hum of background music. No one had noticed me yet, and for a fleeting moment, I wished it could stay that way. Because even before my mind could fully process what I was seeing, I felt it, something was wrong. Then I saw her. Harper. She stood in the middle of the living room, radiant, glowing. But it wasn't me she was smiling at. It was him. Mason. My best friend. And his hands rested gently on her swollen belly. The belly I didn't know existed. Everything inside me locked up. The voices around me became nothing more than muffled background noise. And then, just beyond them, I saw my mother. She was standing near the kitchen, her posture stiff, her expression tight. She had seen me. And she knew. That realization hit harder than anything else. They all knew. Mason was talking, rambling, actually, saying something about the nursery, about how he'd been painting it himself. About how he and Harper had picked out the crib together. The words barely registered. My mind was drowning, struggling to keep up, to make sense of something that had no logical explanation. No matter which way I turned it, no matter how desperately I tried to grasp onto some reason, there was none. There was no version of this where I wasn't the fool. Then, mid-laugh, mid-conversation, mid-whatever the hell this was, Harper turned her head. Her eyes met mine. And I saw it. I saw the exact moment her world shattered, the moment the carefully built lie collapsed under its own weight. Mason, still oblivious, kept talking, his hands still resting protectively on her stomach. We picked it out together last week, he was saying, still smiling, as if he hadn't just shoved a knife into my chest. As if he hadn't just burned my entire life to the ground. I didn't even feel my mother grab my arm. I barely registered the way she tried to steer me back toward the door. "We weren't expecting you today," she whispered, her voice urgent. As if that changed anything. As if me arriving today instead of next week somehow altered the reality in front of me, the reality where my best friend was standing in my house, his hands on my wife. I yanked my arm free, my voice dangerously low. "Talk." The word came out slow, deliberate, like the calm before a storm. "Talk about what, exactly?" Silence. My chest rose and fell with each measured breath. "Talk about how my wife is pregnant with my best friend's child." The room froze. Someone turned off the music. The air itself seemed to still, as if holding its breath. Harper's face went ghostly pale. Mason's hands finally, dropped from her belly, but it didn't matter. I had already seen everything I needed to see. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a surprise party gone wrong. This was betrayal, carefully crafted, meticulously hidden, and now laid bare for everyone to witness. My words had cut through the celebration like a knife, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. No laughter. No clinking glasses. Conversations had died mid-sentence. Every eye in the room was locked on me, waiting. Harper's mother, Scarlett, who had been rubbing her daughter's stomach just moments ago, pulled her hand away like she'd touched an open flame. My father, Samuel, sitting quietly in the corner with a drink in hand, wouldn't even look at me. And Harper, my wife, my partner, the woman I had built a life with, stood frozen, her lips parted, but no words came. Mason, meanwhile, had stiffened. The easy confidence he carried just seconds ago had vanished. His posture had shifted, no longer relaxed, but tense, like a man who knew he'd just been caught in the act. Because he had been. Harper was the first to speak. "Joseph, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can explain." Explain. Like there was any possible explanation in this world that would make this okay. I clenched my jaw so tightly I swore I could hear my teeth grind. My hands curled into fists at my sides, my breathing slow, controlled, barely. "Go on," I said, my voice disturbingly calm. "I'd love to hear it." No one spoke. The weight of my words pressed down on the room like a lead blanket, suffocating, inescapable. Mason, the guy who always had a slick response, always knew what to say, stood there, frozen, his guilt written all over his face. The man I once considered my closest friend now looked like he was praying for the ground to open up and swallow him whole. And my mother, oh, my mother, she was still trying. Trying to control the damage, trying to smooth over something that was beyond repair. "Joseph, let's step outside," she murmured, her grip on my arm tightening. Her voice was soft, pleading. "This isn't the time." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "This isn't the time?" My voice rose slightly, the anger building in my chest. "When exactly was the right time, Mom? When the baby was born? When my best friend's kid started calling me Uncle Joseph?" My father shifted uncomfortably in the corner, still refusing to meet my eyes. He had known. He had known, and he had said nothing. I shook my head, the bitter taste of betrayal thick in my throat. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked him directly. His silence was answer enough. The fire inside me burned hotter. I turned back to Harper. She looked on the verge of tears, but I didn't care. She didn't get to cry. Not when I had spent months overseas, working, breaking my back, believing I was building a future for us, while she was doing this. "Tell me, Harper," I said, my voice steady, measured, each word cutting like glass. "How long?" She swallowed hard. "Joseph, please. It's not what you think." That phrase, "not what you think," was the final crack before the dam broke. "Not what I think?" My voice was sharp, edged with something dangerous. "So my own eyes are lying to me?" I gestured at the undeniable proof, the obvious curve of her stomach. "You're telling me that's not his child? That this entire baby shower, the decorations, the gifts, the nursery, everything isn't exactly what it looks like?" Her lip quivered. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. I let out a dry, hollow laugh. "Oh, how considerate of you." I tilted my head, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "How exactly were you planning to tell me, Harper? After the baby was born? Or were you just going to let me keep believing we were still married while you played house with him?" Then I turned to Mason, who still hadn't said a damn word. "What's the matter, Mason?" I taunted, my voice sharp with venom. "Cat got your tongue? You had plenty to say when you were screwing my wife." He flinched. Good. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain that was tearing me apart. "Joseph, it wasn't like that," Mason finally spoke, his voice tight, defensive. We didn't mean for this to happen." That phrase, "we didn't mean for this to happen," made something inside me snap. I almost lunged at him right there. Instead, I let out a sharp, cutting laugh, shaking my head. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I echoed, my voice filled with pure disbelief. "What, you just tripped and fell inside her?" A collective gasp rippled through the room. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some grabbed their bags, suddenly desperate to leave but too afraid to move. Good. Let them sit in the discomfort. Harper wiped at her face, tears now falling freely. "Joseph, I never wanted to hurt you," she sobbed. I scoffed. "Yeah, you could have fooled me." That's when Scarlett, my mother-in-law, finally decided to step in. And of course, it wasn't for me. "Joseph, that's enough," she snapped. "Harper doesn't need this stress." Stress. She was worried about Harper's stress. A sickening wave of nausea rolled through me. The sheer irony of it made my head spin. I turned to face her, my voice eerily calm. "Her stress?" I repeated slowly, the weight of my words thick with something dark, something buried deep. Then I looked her dead in the eyes. "Where was this concern when I lost my baby 2 years ago?" Scarlett's face lost all color. Harper sucked in a sharp breath. Mason looked away. They knew. They all knew exactly what I was talking about. 2 years ago, I had sat in a cold hospital waiting room, gripping Harper's trembling hand as she cried. My heart shattered right alongside hers as we lost our child before we even had the chance to meet them. I had held her through the nights of grief, whispering reassurances, promising her we'd get through it together. That when we were ready, we'd try again. And now she was carrying another man's child while the people around me toasted and celebrated like it was some goddamn miracle. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out of there. My eyes landed on the gift table, scanning the neatly wrapped boxes until I spotted one with my mother's name on it. Without thinking, I grabbed it, ignoring her sharp protests as I tore it open. A small white onesie with blue details slipped into my hands. She had bought a gift. For my wife's affair baby. My own mother. I felt the nausea rise like a tidal wave. My fingers clenched around the soft fabric, my jaw tightening as I turned to face her. My voice was low, eerily calm. "You got her something nice, Mom," I murmured. "Did you keep the receipt?" Harper let out a choked sob. My mother's lip trembled. Mason stepped forward, his voice hesitant. "Joseph, please." I dropped the onesie at his feet. "Enough." My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I scanned the room, the faces of people I had once trusted. People who had sat in my home, laughed at my table, shared meals with me, all while knowing. All while lying to my face. I inhaled sharply, forcing myself to stay composed. Then, finally, I turned to Mason. "You better get a job," I said, my voice unsettlingly calm. "Because from this moment on, you're on your own." Mason paled. "What do you mean?" I smiled then, slow, deliberate. "It means, Mason, that while I was overseas, I wasn't just working." I let the word settle before delivering the final blow. I was also consulting a lawyer. Harper stiffened. Mason's eyes widened. I let the moment stretch, let them absorb it before I drove the knife all the way in. "I have proof of every penny I spent on this house," I said. "On this marriage. On you." And just like that, I turned and walked out. Let them sit in their mess. Let them drown in it. I was done. The night air hit me like a cold slap, but it wasn't enough to cool the fire raging inside me. My hands were shaking, whether from fury or shock, I couldn't tell. Behind me, the once lively celebration had collapsed into a stunned silence. But I knew it wouldn't last. The whispers would start soon, the justifications, the excuses, the damage control. I could already hear it in my head. "It just happened. We never meant to hurt you. You were gone so much." I clenched my fists. I had spent the last year breaking my back overseas, pouring everything I had into providing for her, sending every paycheck home, all for this. For my wife to betray me with the one person I trusted most. A bitter laugh escaped me. Maybe I should have seen the signs. Maybe I did, deep down. Maybe that's why I never told Harper I was coming home early. Because some part of me had already suspected. But nothing, could have prepared me for this. I took a step toward my car, barely registering the movement when the front door swung open behind me. "Joseph, wait." Harper's voice. I kept walking. The soft patter of her flats against the pavement barely registered over the sound of my blood pounding in my ears. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. Just talk to me." I stopped. Slowly, I turned around. My pulse roared in my ears, my breath slow and controlled, but inside? Inside, I was barely holding the storm back. "Talk?" My voice was dangerously low. "Talk to you?" Like how you talked to me while you were screwing Mason. That kind of talk. She flinched, her arms wrapping protectively around her stomach like she could somehow shield herself from my words. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the devastation she had left me with. Joseph, it wasn't like that, she whispered. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh. My head tilted slightly. Then explain it to me, Harper. Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty damn clear. Tears welled up in her eyes. For a split second, I almost felt something, almost. But then it all came rushing back. The late-night phone calls where she whispered that she missed me. The video chats where she smiled, telling me she couldn't wait for me to come home. The messages filled with I love yous. All of it, every single word, a lie. You were gone for so long, she whispered, her voice trembling. You don't understand what it was like being alone all the time. My jaw clenched. So that justifies it? My voice was sharp, cutting. That justifies betraying me with Mason? She shook her head quickly. No, I mean. I didn't plan for it to happen. I felt my fingers curl into fists. That's the same damn thing Mason said. She flinched. Good. Tell me something, Harper, I continued, stepping closer, my voice low and steady. When exactly did it just happen? Was it when I was sending money home so we could build a future together? When I was working through the night so I could come back and give you the life you deserved? When I called you, and you looked me in the eyes and told me you loved me? I stopped myself, shaking my head. Forget it. None of it matters now. Her face crumpled. It does matter. I exhaled sharply, my patience wearing thin. No, Harper, I said, voice clipped. It doesn't. Because you already made your choice. Her lip quivered. Joseph, please. I still love you. I let out a sharp scoff, shaking my head. Love? I echoed, disbelief dripping from my voice. Is that what you call this? I gestured toward the house, the decorations, the celebration she had planned behind my back. Because from where I'm standing, this doesn't look like love. It looks like a goddamn joke. Panic flickered in her eyes. She could feel it slipping through her fingers now. I never wanted to hurt you, she insisted. I pinched the bridge of my nose, exhaling sharply. Stop saying that. But it's true. No, Harper, I cut her off, my voice edged with finality. If you didn't want to hurt me, you wouldn't have done this. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and for a brief moment, she looked like the woman I had once loved. The woman I had trusted. The woman I had married. But she wasn't that woman anymore. I can't lose you, she whispered. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between us. Then, my voice came quiet, firm, and unwavering. You already did. I turned my back on her. I had barely taken 2 steps when another voice cut through the night. Joseph. I went rigid. My fists clenched at my sides. Slowly, I turned. Mason stood in the doorway, looking like a man about to face a firing squad. The usual cocky smirk he always wore was gone. His hands twitched at his sides, like he wanted to do something, anything, to make this moment easier. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to feel the satisfying crack of my fist against his jaw, wanted to see the pain flash across his face just for a second. Just so he'd know. Just so he'd feel even an ounce of the rage burning inside me. But I didn't. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I inhaled deeply, forcing the fury down into something cold, something controlled. You have 10 seconds, I said, my voice eerily calm. Say what you need to say. Mason swallowed hard. I never wanted you to find out this way. That was his opening line. A dark chuckle escaped me. "Oh, that's rich," I muttered. "Not, I'm sorry. Not, I shouldn't have done it. Not, I betrayed you in the worst possible way. Just that you never wanted me to find out this way." Mason had the decency to look ashamed. "No, man. Don't." My voice snapped like a whip. "Don't man me. You don't get to call me that. You don't get to act like we're still friends." I took a step forward, lowering my voice. "You lost that right the second you put your hands on my wife." Mason looked down, swallowing thickly. I shook my head, my voice filled with quiet fury. "Tell me, Mason. When did it start?" He hesitated. "Wrong move." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. "You don't even have the balls to tell me the truth, do you?" Mason's throat bobbed. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he muttered. I let out another humorless laugh, shaking my head. "And yet, here we are. I don't remember unlocking the car door. I don't remember getting in. All I remember is gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned bone white, my breath coming in short, uneven bursts, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal. I was supposed to come home to my wife. I was supposed to surprise her. Instead, I had walked straight into a celebration, for another man's child. My vision blurred for a moment, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here. Not now. I swallowed hard, clenched my jaw, and shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, loud and unforgiving, mirroring the storm raging inside me. My hands were still shaking, my entire body rigid with the weight of betrayal. But I didn't care. I needed to get the hell away from that house. From them. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of them in the rearview mirror, Harper frozen in the driveway, Mason standing there like a lost child, my mother whispering something furiously to my father, Scarlett still gripping that damn banner like it meant something. Like it wasn't a cruel joke. The taste of bile rose in my throat, bitter and scorching. I floored the gas pedal. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there. So I drove. Aimlessly. The city blurred past me, neon lights streaking through the windshield like ghosts. My mind wouldn't shut off, replaying every moment, every lie. The late-night calls. The I miss yous. The sweet, careful words she whispered through the phone. Had she been with him when she sent me those messages? Had she laughed with him, touched him, whispered to him in the dark while I sat alone in some godforsaken hotel room halfway across the world, thinking I was making sacrifices for us? A humorless chuckle scraped its way out of my throat. God, I was a fool. My grip on the wheel tightened. The signs had been there, hadn't they? Small shifts. Almost imperceptible, but there. The hesitation before she answered my calls. The way she took just a second too long to respond to my texts. The way she no longer sounded lonely when I told her I missed her. And Mason. Mason. My best friend. The man I trusted more than anyone. I had known him for years. I had trusted him. He had been the first person I called when I got the job offer overseas. I could still hear his voice, telling me how proud he was, how he'd look after Harper while I was gone. Yeah. He sure as hell looked after her, didn't he? My foot pressed harder on the gas pedal. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, dark and empty. I needed somewhere to think. Somewhere to breathe. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a cheap roadside motel, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. It wasn't home, but at least it was far away from that house. The receptionist barely looked at me as I slid my card across the counter. She handed me a key, and I took the stairs two at a time, needing to get behind a locked door, needing to be alone. The second it clicked shut behind me, the weight of everything came crashing down. I barely made it to the bed before I collapsed onto it. And that's when I finally broke. A sound tore from my throat, something raw, something ugly, something I didn't even recognize. I wasn't crying. Not in the way most people cry. No, this was different. This was years of sacrifice, trust, and love imploding all at once. This was grief. Not for a person, but for a life that never really existed. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my chest heaving, my body shaking with the force of it all. My marriage was over. Everything I had been building was gone. I had been reduced to nothing more than an afterthought in my own home. Slowly, I rolled onto my side, my fingers curling into a tight fist. No. I wouldn't let them have the satisfaction of breaking me. I wouldn't let them win. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Every muscle in my body ached from tension, my head pounded from exhaustion, and my eyes burned from the weight of everything I had learned. But my mind? My mind was clear. And I knew exactly what I had to do. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number. My lawyer. I hit dial. Joseph, came the groggy voice on the other end. It's early. What's up? I want to start the process today, I said, my voice firm, unshaken. A pause. The divorce? Property division? Everything? Yes. A low whistle. Damn. That bad? I ran a hand over my jaw, exhaling sharply. Worse. I heard the rustling of papers, the shifting of something in the background. All right. We'll file first thing Monday. I assume you want this handled aggressively? A grim smile pulled at my lips. Oh, I want it handled so aggressively that Mason will wish he never met her. The first text came that afternoon. Harper, Joseph, please talk to me. I know you're hurt, but we need to discuss this. I didn't respond. The next one came an hour later. Mason, man, I know you're mad. I get it. But can we at least have a conversation? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I locked my phone and tossed it onto the bed. I wasn't playing their game. Let them squirm. The next morning, I sat in a quiet cafe near the motel, watching the world outside move on. People laughed. Couples held hands. Parents fed their kids. Life kept turning, indifferent to the wreckage I had left behind. And I realized something. I would move on, too. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest, relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't breaking my back trying to keep a marriage together. I wasn't pouring everything I had into someone who didn't deserve it. I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's happiness on my shoulders. I was free. And for the first time since stepping into that house, I smiled. That night, I finally sent Mason a response. 2 words, talk to my lawyer. Then I powered off my phone. No more explanations. No more conversations. No more Joseph, please. I had given them everything. Now? I was taking everything back. The legal battle began. The weight of it didn't hit me all at once. It came in waves, some small, barely noticeable. Others so overwhelming that I felt like I couldn't breathe. But through it all, one thing remained clear. I was done. The betrayal had already happened. The damage was already done. Now, it was about taking back control. The next morning, I sat in my motel room, staring at my phone, waiting for my lawyer's call. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. Joseph, we're good to go. I leaned back against the headboard, gripping the phone tighter. Walk me through it. We're filing today. The house is in your name, and all financial contributions are documented under you. Mason has no legal claim to it. I let out a slow breath, absorbing that. And Harper? She'll have the right to contest, but given the circumstances, it won't hold up. We're filing for an uncontested divorce. And with the financial records we have, she won't be able to touch a dime of your money. If she fights it, we take it to court, but honestly, she won't win. I let that sink in. My entire marriage, reduced to legal terms and financial evidence. I had built everything for us, for a future. And now? Now, the only thing that mattered was how quickly I could dismantle it. What about my accounts? I asked. Already in motion. We're securing your assets and freezing joint ones. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Mason thought he had won. Thought he had taken something from me. But he had no idea what was coming. The first signs of panic came when the messages started rolling in that afternoon. Harper, Joseph, I know you're angry, but can we talk? I didn't want this to happen this way. I ignored it. An hour later, another one. Harper, please, just one conversation. You don't have to do this. Don't have to do this? She was acting like I was the one tearing everything apart, as if I was choosing to end things rather than simply reacting to the destruction she had already caused. Then came Mason. Mason, man, I messed up. I get it. But let's not go nuclear, all right? We can figure this out. Figure this out? The audacity. He had already figured it out the moment he made the choice to betray me. The moment he stood in my house, beside my wife, preparing for a child that wasn't mine. I locked my phone. I wasn't playing their game. By the next morning, Harper must have received the first set of legal documents, because her next text had a different tone. Harper, you filed for divorce? I didn't answer. Harper, Joseph, please. Let's talk before this goes too far. I stared at the message, waiting for that familiar ache, the instinct to fix things. The pull to smooth over the cracks, to try. But it never came. Instead, I sent a message to my lawyer. Make sure she understands. Mason gets nothing. His response was almost immediate. Lawyer, trust me, she'll understand soon. I was sitting in a cafe, stirring my coffee, when my phone started ringing. Harper. For a moment, I considered answering. Maybe a part of me wanted to hear her beg, to hear her try and justify the unjustifiable. Then I hit decline. 10 seconds later, another call. This time, Scarlett. I let it ring out. A minute later, a message. Scarlett, Joseph, I raised my daughter better than this, and I won't justify her actions. But don't you think you're being a little extreme? Extreme? I closed my eyes and exhaled, shaking my head. That was exactly the problem. They didn't think I was serious. They thought this was just a reaction, something temporary, that eventually, I'd calm down, forgive, and let everything slide back to normal. They thought wrong. 2 days later, my lawyer sent me an update. Mason had been served. That night, my phone lit up. Mason, man, come on. This is insane. You're freezing me out of the house? A slow smirk curled at my lips. Yes. He called. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another text. Mason, where am I supposed to go? I stared at the screen, a dark satisfaction settling in my chest. Not my problem. By the end of the week, everything was unraveling for them. Harper wasn't just losing a husband, she was losing stability. Mason wasn't just losing a best friend, he was losing the free ride he'd been enjoying for years. And me? I was finally reclaiming everything they thought they could take from me. I had spent months believing I was making sacrifices for my family. I had spent years believing I was building something real. But I was wrong. Because in the end, I wasn't the one making sacrifices. I was the one being sacrificed. And now, it was their turn to lose. For the first time in years, something unfamiliar settled in my chest: freedom. And I wasn't about to waste it. I knew the moment Mason's life truly started to fall apart. Because his messages stopped being cocky. And started sounding desperate. At first, he had tried to reason with me, thinking he could talk his way out of this, like he always had. Thinking I'd eventually calm down, that I'd eventually cave, that things would eventually go back to normal. But nothing about this was normal. Because I wasn't giving him that option. By the time the full weight of the legal situation hit him, Mason was out of tricks. His first real panic message came late at night. "Mason, Joseph, man, can we talk? Please, just 5 minutes." I stared at the screen. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't reply. The next day, he tried again. "Mason, look, I get it. You're angry. You have every right to be. But you're freezing me out of everything. I don't even have a place to stay." I read the message, took a slow sip of my coffee, and set my phone back down. He had a place to stay, Scarlett's couch. That wasn't my problem. Word spread fast. I knew it was only a matter of time before people started realizing that Mason, the guy who used to walk around with his chest puffed out, always acting like he had life figured out, was suddenly in serious trouble. Some mutual friends started reaching out. "Luke, dude, are you sure you want to do this? He's crashing with Harper's mom. That's got to be humiliating." I smirked. "Me, good." Luke hesitated before responding. "Luke, man, you're really not going to let this go, huh? Let it go?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the message. They acted like this was a petty argument. Like Mason had just borrowed my car without asking. Like he hadn't destroyed my entire life. Me, would you let it go if your best friend screwed your wife and then threw a baby shower for their kid in your house? No response. Exactly. The moment I cut off access to the house and joint finances, Mason must have thought he'd just figure something out. Except he'd never had to figure anything out before. Because I had always been the responsible one. Mason was the guy who floated through life, always landing on his feet, because someone else, usually me, was there to catch him. But now? Now I had pulled the safety net. And he was free falling. My lawyer confirmed that the mortgage had been entirely covered by me, which meant Mason had no legal right to the house. No job. No income. No real way to contribute financially. And now? He was scrambling. I was eating lunch at a small cafe near my motel when I felt a presence hovering nearby. I looked up. Mason. He looked rough. His eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, his hair disheveled, his usual cocky posture replaced with slumped shoulders. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Because he had. "Joseph," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "Can I sit?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting him stew for a second before gesturing at the chair across from me. He sank into it like a man seeking shelter from a storm, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them up. He hesitated, swallowing hard. "I know I messed up." I said nothing. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with my silence. "Man, you've got to believe me. I never wanted this to happen." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean you never wanted me to find out?" His lips pressed into a thin line. I let out a humorless chuckle. "Tell me something, Mason," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "What exactly was the plan?" He didn't answer. I leaned in slightly. "Were you just going to let me keep paying for everything while you played house with my wife?" His gaze dropped to the table. "You thought I'd be the fool forever, didn't you? He exhaled sharply. I didn't think. No, you didn't, I cut him off. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about the consequences. You thought you could take everything from me and walk away without paying the price. His jaw clenched. Joseph, please, he finally said. I don't have anywhere else to go. I stared at him. Mason, the man who had stood in my house, rubbing my wife's stomach while talking about their baby, was now sitting in front of me, begging. For a second, I just watched him. Then I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring the taste, and set the cup down. That's not my problem, I said. His eyes snapped up to mine. His panic was real now. Joseph. I cut him off again. I have nothing left to say to you, Mason. I leaned back in my chair. Whatever sympathy you think I have, I met his eyes, voice ice cold. It doesn't exist. He swallowed hard, desperation flickering across his face. You don't have to do this. I smiled. Oh, but I do. Pushing my chair back, I tossed a few bills onto the table and stood up. Mason blinked up at me, his expression caught between disbelief and panic. That's it? He asked. I nodded. That's it. Then I turned and walked out. And I didn't look back. Days passed. Then came the eviction notice. Without me footing the bill, Mason hadn't been able to keep up with the mounting costs. No real job. No steady income. No way to sustain the house without me. And just like that, the place that had once felt like my prison became his downfall. I showed up the day they were forcing him out. Boxes were scattered across the front lawn, spilling open like the wreckage of a shipwrecked life. Harper stood to the side, clutching her belly, pale and exhausted. And Mason was arguing with the officer handling the eviction. You don't understand, he snapped. I live here. The officer shook his head. Not anymore. Mason's head snapped around at the sound of my footsteps. The moment he saw me, his expression twisted into pure hatred. You did this, he snarled. I shrugged. No, Mason. You did this. His hands curled into fists. You just want to see me suffer, don't you? I smiled slightly, meeting his gaze. Yes. He let out a low, frustrated noise, running his hands through his hair. Where the hell am I supposed to go? I glanced at Harper. Maybe your baby mama has a solution. She flinched. Mason turned to her, waiting for an answer. She said nothing. His face crumpled. Even she wasn't going to save him. The officer stepped forward. You need to leave the property. Now. Mason turned back to me, his anger fading into something else. Something raw. Something I hadn't seen before, fear. Joseph, he tried again, his voice quieter now. Man, please. I didn't say a word. I just watched. And then it happened, the realization settling in, the weight of it pressing down on him. Mason, the man who had stolen everything from me, was now left with nothing. And it was his turn to walk away. His shoulders slumped as he grabbed a box, clutching it like it was the last thing he had left. Then, without another word, he turned and started down the street. And for the first time since this all began, I felt it, freedom. Mason didn't bounce back. I knew that because, despite cutting off all communication, word still reached me. Real friends, the ones who actually gave a damn, kept me updated. Sometimes out of concern. Sometimes just to see my reaction. And each new detail was a reminder that karma had finally caught up with him. And I enjoyed every second of it. Mason had been crashing at Scarlett's house, which wasn't much better than sleeping in his car. I heard he tried getting a job. Failed. Tried couch hopping. Burned too many bridges. Even the people who had once stood by him, the ones who had laughed at his jokes, the ones who had supported him, started pulling away. Why? Because no one respects a man who destroys his best friend's life, and still ends up with nothing. Poetic justice. Harper wasn't faring much better. Without me, she had to rely entirely on Mason. And Mason? He had already proven himself to be useless. It didn't take long before the cracks started forming. Because when you strip away the comfort, the stability, the security, people start showing their true colors. And Harper? She finally saw Mason for what he really was. A leech. Which is why, a few months later, I got a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. Unknown number, I left him. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something unexpected. Not regret. Not sadness. Satisfaction. Because I already knew who it was from. Harper. Later, through a friend, I got the full story. Harper had dumped Mason. And not just dumped him, she wanted alimony. I nearly choked on my drink when I heard that. "You're kidding," I said, shaking my head. My friend grinned. "Dead serious. She claims he promised to take care of her, and now that she's pregnant, she needs financial support." I let out a slow, disbelieving laugh. Harper had betrayed me for a man who couldn't even take care of himself. And now, she was looking for a new safety net. I let out a sharp laugh. Mason, the man who had betrayed me, who had risked everything for her, was now getting played in the exact same way. The irony was delicious. And the best part? Mason didn't have a damn penny to his name. He had burned it all, his friendships, his reputation, his financial stability, all for a woman who was now taking him for whatever little he had left. It was the perfect ending. Or so I thought. One night, I found myself at a bar. It wasn't the kind of place I used to go. It was quiet, low-lit, barely crowded, the kind of place where no one knew your name, and no one cared. Just the kind of place where I could drink in peace, without worrying about running into ghosts from my past. But fate? Fate had a twisted sense of humor. Because just as I was finishing my drink, I felt it, someone watching me. I turned. Mason. He looked wrecked. Gaunt face. Dark circles under his eyes. Shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. He looked like a man who had lost everything. Because he had. I didn't say anything. Just lifted my glass and took another slow sip. He took it as an invitation. Sliding into a seat 2 stools away, he gripped a cheap beer like it was his last lifeline. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, he let out a low, broken laugh. "You happy now?" he asked. I set my glass down and tilted my head. "Very." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Figures." I waited. I knew he had more to say. And I was curious, not because I cared, but because I wanted to hear it from his own mouth. The admission that he had lost. And sure enough, after a long pause, he finally sighed and muttered, "She left me." I exhaled through my nose, amused. "Yeah. I heard." Mason let out another humorless laugh. "Of course you did." I leaned back slightly. "So, how's it feel?" His fingers tightened around his beer. "Like hell." I smirked. "Good." He swallowed hard, his atoms apple bobbing. "I never thought she'd do that to me." I raised a brow. "Oh, really? You thought she was different?" Mason hesitated. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm but cutting. "Tell me, Mason. How did your great love fall apart so quickly?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. Because he already knew the answer. Because I already knew the answer. Because Harper only wanted him when he was convenient, when he had something to offer, when he was stealing someone else's stability. But the moment he became a liability, she threw him away. Just like he did to me. And now he was drowning. "Joseph," he finally said, his voice quiet. I held up a hand. "Don't." He swallowed hard. "Man, No." I shook my head. "Whatever you were about to say, save it. I don't want your apology. I don't need your regret. And I sure as hell don't want to hear your excuses." His jaw clenched. I smirked. "Look on the bright side." I gestured loosely. "You and Harper got what you wanted. You don't have to feel guilty anymore." Mason let out a sharp breath. "That's not funny." I shrugged. "It kind of is." He stared at his drink, eyes unfocused. "I lost everything, man." I lifted my glass in a mock toast. "Cheers to that." He looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw it, true regret. Not just because of where he was now. But because of where he could have been. Because if he hadn't thrown it all away, if he hadn't betrayed me, his life would still be comfortable. But he had made his choice. And now he had to live with it. I finished my drink, set the empty glass down, and stood up. Without another word, I walked out. And I never looked back. Because Mason was nothing more than a lesson learned. And I was finally free. Mason tried to contest his own divorce. Failed. Harper drained him for everything he had left, which, at that point, wasn't much. And me? I moved on. I cut ties with everyone who had betrayed me. I bought a new place, one with no memories, no ghosts, no reminders of a life that had once felt real. And the final, sweetest justice? Months later, Mason tried to reach out again. One last desperate attempt. "Mason, Joseph, I need help." I stared at the text for a long moment. Then I deleted it without answering. Because Mason was dead to me. And I had never felt more alive. There's a moment after every storm where everything feels too quiet, like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see what comes next. That's what life felt like in the months after I burned everything to the ground. For the first time in years, I had no obligations. No wife to worry about. No best friend to look out for. No family breathing down my neck, telling me to forgive. It was just me. And I was finally free. I distanced myself from everyone connected to my past, the so-called friends who had known about the affair and said nothing, the family members who had tried to guilt me into staying married like I owed Harper something. Even my own mother, who had bought a damn gift for Mason and Harper's child. I was done with all of them. The only people I kept in my life were the ones who had actually stood by me, the ones who had called out the betrayal before I even saw it coming. And honestly, my circle was a hell of a lot smaller now. But that was fine. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surrounded by snakes. I sold the house, not because I had to. Financially, I was fine. But I didn't want to live in the same walls where my marriage had died. I bought a new apartment, sleek and modern, with a view of the city skyline. No memories. No ghosts. I furnished it the way I wanted, no more debating over paint colors, no more compromising on furniture Harper liked. It was my space. And it felt right. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I should have known it wasn't over. Because people like Harper? They don't just let go. Her first desperate attempt came through a message. "Harper, Joseph, I know I hurt you, but can we at least talk? Just once." I didn't respond. She tried again. "Harper, I miss you. Please, just one conversation." Miss me? She had spent months sneaking around with Mason. She had thrown away our marriage for him. And now that her perfect life had crumbled, she wanted to come crawling back. Pathetic. She must have finally realized I wasn't taking the bait. Because the next message, it wasn't a text. It was a voice note. I debated whether to play it. Then, out of sheer morbid curiosity, I hit play. Her voice came through, shaky and tired. Joseph, I know you hate me, and I deserve that. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. What happened with Mason, it wasn't supposed to be that way. I don't know what I was thinking. I was lonely, and I made a mistake. I ruined everything, and I regret it every day. I just need you to know that. I let the message play to the end. Then I deleted it. I wasn't her backup plan. She had made her choice. And now, she had to live with it. I should have expected Mason to reach out again. Men like him? They never truly learn. The message came late at night. Mason, Joseph, I need help. That was it. No fake apologies. No excuses. Just desperation. I didn't respond. The next night, another one. Mason, man, I've got nothing left. I don't know what to do. I stared at the message, tapping my fingers against the counter. For a moment, just a second, I imagined what he must look like now. Probably living off whatever scraps he could find. Probably realizing that life without me covering for him was a nightmare. And honestly, good. I had spent years being the safety net for both him and Harper. Now, they could figure it out themselves. I deleted the message without responding. Mason was dead to me. But it wasn't enough that Mason was ruined. It wasn't enough that Harper had lost everything. No, the final nail in the coffin came when Mason, the absolute idiot, tried to appeal the divorce ruling. He actually went to court, trying to get money out of Harper. And the judge? The judge laughed in his face. He walked out of that courtroom with nothing. No money. No house. No reputation. Just regret. And for the first time in months, I slept like a baby. Months later, I was sitting in a cafe, sipping my coffee, when I saw them. Harper and Mason. Not together. They weren't a couple anymore. But they were both broken. Mason was thinner than before. Exhausted. Drained. Aged. Like life had kicked him down, and he had stayed there. Harper, she was pushing a stroller, looking miserable. And me? I was fine. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked past them. For a brief moment, Harper's eyes met mine. And in them, I saw everything. Regret. Shame. A silent plea for something, anything. I held her gaze for a second. Then, slowly, deliberately, I smirked. And kept walking. Mason and Harper became irrelevant. People stopped talking about them. The scandal faded. But me? I thrived. I traveled. I met new people. I lived. And best of all, I never wasted another second on traitors. Because in the end, justice had been served. And I was finally, completely free.